Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to How Happiness Thinks. Today we will be doing lesson 1, which is titled The Joy of Being You, Finding a Self-Concept of Happiness. And today's lesson is going to be divided in half. In the first half, we are going to give kind of an introduction to the full course, to the entire course about happiness and the way that Judaism views happiness. And in the second half, we are going to tackle this particular topic, finding a self-concept of happiness, of happiness, how we look at ourselves and how that can help us in terms of being happy. To begin, I'd just like to point out that for many, many years, the most popular undergraduate class at Harvard University was exactly what you would expect. It's called Intro to Economics. Right? Why was the most popular class? Because everybody wants to make a buck, right? But in 2006, with the arrival of an Israeli-born psychologist by the name of Tal Ben Shachar, some of you may have read some of his books. He has a few books on happiness. He started to teach a course, for lack of a better word, on happiness. It was a course on what he calls positive psychology. And it offered, psychological insights into daily life and being joyful in the day-to-day moments of life. And that quickly surpassed the economics class by a large margin. Over 800 students attended, making it the most popular course ever taught at the university. It was so popular that it was attracting not just students from the university, but also parents and grandparents who were coming to join their children and their grandchildren to learn about this topic. And I think this serves as one of many examples that there's a very, very big thirst these days to study and learn about human happiness. So I'd like to start with an exercise, because before we start to study about happiness, and obviously the question is how happiness thinks, we'll talk more about that later today. Before we do that, what is happiness? How does happiness affect us? So I'd like to do an exercise with you guys. If you can take out a pen, and if you have your course, your textbook, you can write it down in the lines provided. If not, then you can do so on a paper. And maybe we'll ask each of you to share the answer to one of them. All right, Ron, we're going to start with you. All right, question number 1. How are happy people different from unhappy people? This is just your observation. There's no correct or incorrect answer. What would you say?
That's a tough one.
Okay.
For me, for members of my race, it's a tough one.
I don't know that we need to make. I think when you say members of your race, you're contrasting two different races. But why don't you think about it? Okay, but why don't you think about it within a race, within the Black community, within the Jewish community, within the white community, whatever it is? What differentiates happy people from unhappy people in your view? That's it. People that you know that are happy, people that you know that are unhappy. What do you think is the difference between them?
People that are happy, they are relaxed.
Okay.
They feel secure in their environment. They're not constantly looking over their shoulder. They don't have to worry about that.
And unhappy people are the opposite. They're stressed.
Right.
They're
Stressed
constantly looking
out,
over their shoulder. They're constantly worried.
Exactly.
Okay. Question number 2. Mark, this one's for you. To what degree do you think our circumstances, so think of family, education, career, right? How much do you think those circumstances impact our overall happiness?
I personally, in my family, happiness was never stressed. We never brought it up. We never said, oh, now this is a happy occasion. Our reality was just here and now, whatever's going on. I think the personal circumstances, if your parents were people who promoted happiness and said, oh, smile or this or that, I think that would have made a big difference in my own life.
Okay. So you're saying you think to you, certain circumstances, and you're not necessarily saying all of them. Like, for example, I think the most popular one, which is money, is not even the one you're talking about. You're talking more about like maybe the people around you can impact your overall happiness, things like that. Okay. So you think it's to a large degree, but maybe it depends what type of circumstances. Okay. Dave, you get number 3. You ready? What are some of the challenges to living a life of happiness? What do you think are the greatest challenges? You're muted, Dave, so don't forget to unmute.
I think some of the greatest challenges are feeling out of control in your life. I think maybe that's one of the greatest challenges, is that when we're feeling out of control of things, we're tend to be anxious and unhappy. I think greatest challenges, the inability to maintain or sustain a positive outlook on life, that feeling that you're trapped and kind of unable to get out of circumstances that are challenging or
right. So you're kind of treating this one as the flip side to circumstances that might impact your overall happiness. You're saying if there are circumstances that are outside of your control, those are major challenges.
Yes, I think so. Right. It's
okay.
Not having a center point, a guide point, a place where you can go, where you can get to quote your happy place.
Right. Yep, I think this is something that religion would have a lot to say about. Spirituality would have a lot to say about, but we'll get to that later. Okay.
Absolutely.
For now, I want to move on to the fourth question. This is one that I'm going to take. What are some of the benefits of living happily? I think this is something we can all think about, and maybe even some things were mentioned as we were discussing when Ron was discussing the first question, right? How are happy people different from unhappy people? And he discussed some of the benefits, because some of the feelings that he described and some of the symptoms that he described are things that we all would want to have in our lives. But for this, I'd like to turn to a video presentation that we have, okay, in which we're going to go through a few things that studies have shown clearly show are benefits that come out directly from being happy. Please turn your attention to the video screen.
In the film Annie Hall, Woody Allen suggests that happy people are shallow and empty, have no ideas and nothing interesting to say. Woody Allen may have been funny, but according to recent scientific studies, he was wrong. Research has shown that happy people show more flexibility and ingenuity in their thinking, are more productive in their jobs, are better leaders, and they even earn more money. A fascinating and now classic study demonstrates a link between happiness and longevity. The Nun study focused on 180 nuns who joined convents in Milwaukee and Baltimore between 1931 and 1943. On entering the convent, the nuns wrote an autobiography describing their lives and reasons for joining a religious order. Years later, researchers at Kentucky University analyzed these autobiographies. Based on the level of positive feeling expressed in each autobiography, the nuns were categorized into 4 groups, ranging from the happiest 25% to the least happy 25%. Research results showed that 90% of the most cheerful group were alive at age 85, versus 34% of the least cheerful group. 54% of the most cheerful group was alive at age 94, as opposed to 11% of the least cheerful group. Those who used many words expressing positive emotion lived on average over 10 years longer than those who used few such words. Research has also shown that being genuinely happy is an indicator for successful relationships. At the University of California at Berkeley, researchers studied 141 senior class photos of women from the 1960 yearbook of Mills College. They examined their smiles. Half of the women had genuine smiles, the so-called Duchenne smile, in which the corners of the mouth turn up and the skin around the eyes crinkle. And half the women had inauthentic smiles, known as the Pan-American smile, after the flight attendants in television ads for the now defunct airline. The women were contacted at ages 27, 43, and 52, and asked about their marriages and their life satisfaction. It was found that, on average, women who genuinely smiled in their photos were more likely to be married, stay married, and experience more personal well-being over the next 30 years. Numerous studies indicate that happiness leads to success at work, better health, and good relationships. Why is this so? Why does happiness result in so many positive byproducts? What do you think?
What do you think? Why do you think, this is the next question we have here on the table. Why do you think it would be the case that happiness leads to so many positive benefits in our lives? Longer age, happier marriages, etc. Why is that? And that's a rhetorical question. I'm not looking for answers, because it's really the topic that we're going to be discussing today. And we are going to try and answer that question, why it would be that happiness, which seems to be one part of it, seems to affect so many other aspects in our lives. Things like we discussed health, but it also affects how productive we are at work. It affects how functional we are in the relationships around us, etc. Why? So we're going to attempt to answer this question, and we're going to try to do so in 3 stages. We're going to answer it first on a simple level, then we'll take it a step deeper, and then we'll take it 1 step yet deeper. Okay? And the first one comes to us from the Tanya. The Tanya, as I know most of you know, is a book written by the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Hasidism. And it discusses psychological ideas that come to us directly from the Torah, based on Kabbalistic and mystical concepts, but directly psychologically related. So how to deal with our emotions and our interpersonal relationships, etc., and how all these things are affected by our soul, or as Tanya puts it, the 2 souls that we have that are battling within us, right? So the Alter Rebbe at one point is talking about self-mastery. All right, he's talking about the idea that when you're trying to control yourself, control your impulses, right? You're trying to diet, you're trying to hold yourself back from certain temptations that you might have. Whatever it is, joy has a direct correlation with how much self-mastery you are going to have. Ron, you have a book, right? So I can ask you to read for us, please. Text 1. We are on page 12 in our books.
This should be made known as a cardinal principle. The internal spiritual battle waged against one's negative impulses is similar to a physical wrestling match. If 2 individuals are wrestling with each other, each striving to fell the other, but one is lazy and lethargic, he will fall and be easily defeated, even if he is stronger than his opponent. The same applies regarding the conquest of one's impulses. It is impossible to defeat them from a state of laziness and heaviness, which stem from sadness and dull heart, but only from a state of brisk enthusiasm, which derives from happiness and a heart free from any trace of worry and sadness in the world.
Thank you, Ron. So if we want to be successful in mastering ourselves, self-discipline, controlling ourselves, etc., joy is going to play a large role in that. There's a line, they say, it's not about the size of the man in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the man. Has anybody ever heard that line? Right? It's not about how big the man that's in the fight is, how rich the person is, how many resources they have, etc. It's about how big the fight that they have within them, what type of morale do they have. This is why armies around the world have always appreciated this. And they've always said we need to invest not only in the physical materials that our soldiers have or our military possesses or has access to, the resources, but also into their emotional and mental resources. How do we make sure that they know what they're fighting for and that they would give everything to fight for it, et cetera, et cetera? How do we grow the fight in the man versus the man in the fight? And the answer that the Alter Rebbe is presenting is that one of the biggest ways to do that is by making sure you are happy. When a person is happy, you gain a decisive edge in the battle of self-mastery. Why? So Hasidus explains that the nature of joy is that when a person is joyous, they become effusive. They reveal themselves more. So think about it this way. A person might have certain things within them, right? But the way that we do, the way that we operate when we walk around society is that we're constantly holding back on those things. You have a certain part of your identity, a certain part of your I don't know if identity is the right word, a certain part of your personality, certain strengths and talents that you have that you might choose not to reveal for whatever reason. Let's take a simple reason, by the way. Sometimes that's just because you're shy, right? You're around other people and you are maybe embarrassed to clap your hands, for example, right? Or embarrassed to dance, which is maybe a good thing. Like if we didn't have a shyness, we'd be dancing everywhere we go. It'd be a little strange, right? But okay, we don't dance. What happens when a person becomes very, very happy? They're more to do. They're more likely to start doing things that are effusive and that are revealing things that they have within them. They'll dance, they'll clap their hands, they'll. I mean, there's certain basic things. Their face will glow, etc. There's a certain revelation of things that are usually kept within that all of a sudden are showing on the outside. There's a famous story, like a nice story. It's a parable. I didn't prepare to share this. So give me just a second to formulate the thought in my head. There's a parable that I think is the Medrash brings at one point about the son of the king, the crown prince, and I think the king had been testing him, so therefore he sent him out into the world. He gave him a very small amount of money to use it and see how he would fare in the world, because he grew up in the palace and he was very spoiled and taken care of by everyone else, and he wanted to see how he would last. Anyways, in a short order, in a matter of months, not only did he fall from grace and get involved in all sorts of things that he shouldn't have gotten involved in, he ended up arrested and in prison. And while he was imprisoned, right, so he starts telling people, I'm the crown prince. Nobody believes him. Like you look like a simple person. If you're the crown prince, where's your entourage? Where are your people? Where are you this? Right? Nobody believes him, so they haven't thrown into prison. And the whole time he's in prison, he's just weeping bitterly because all he wants is to be, reunited with his father. Let me go back to the palace, etc. Anyways, eventually his father hears about the matter, right? So his father sends word that he is going to, I guess through the prison warden or whatever it is, he's going to be taking him out of prison. He's going to be bringing him back to the palace. So the crown prince becomes extremely happy, right? The problem is he's in prison, so he's surrounded by thugs, and he knows there's another week till whatever the paperwork comes through or whatever it is, right? So what's he going to do? He can't show he's happy. If he's happy, the thug's going to ask him why he's happy. But, they'll figure it out. Then he'll really get it, right? So what does he do? He I guess he had some alcohol with him in prison that they had smuggled in, whatever it is. He starts to give everybody alcohol to drink. All the other thugs in the prison. So everybody starts to get happy, right? He doesn't have any alcohol, but they all have alcohol, so they start to dance. So now he gets to dance. What does it mean? He's brought them to a place, them through chemicals, and him just through happiness, where the revelation of what's inside is and their inhibitions are loose, so that they can actually be who they really want to be. And that's what happiness does to us. What happiness does to us is it brings out certain things from within us that maybe sometimes we're kind of tapping down for whatever reason, and it comes out fully. It opens the valves, let's call it, of our potential and allows our strengths to flow outwards. This might explain why happy people are more successful in all areas of life. Why? Because think about all the areas we mentioned that they would be better. Health, for example, right? Happier people are healthy. Why? When you're happy, it's easier to hold back. It's easier to have self-mastery, as we said, right? In the area of health. So, for example, when it comes to a cookie, what's the chances? We all know about stress eating, right? Or depressed eating and that sort of thing. Why is that the case? That's because when you're happy, you have more self-mastery. You have more fight in the man. So therefore, you're more likely not to eat the cookie, but you know it's not good for you. When you're depressed, you still know the cookie is not good for you, but you're lacking a certain amount of energy of self-mastery to be able to do that. Does that make sense? Same thing is true in a marriage. A marriage also requires a lot of self-mastery. What's the chances when you're depressed and your wife asks you to do something that you really don't want to do? What's the chances you're going to do it? Very low. But if you're very happy, then of course you want to do for her anything she wants. And the opposite, you choose to take her out and do dinner and whatever, and also and then you're the best husband in the world. So that's in a relationship. In the business world, for sure. Obviously, people that are more happy are more self-confident. They're more they're fulfilled in life, and therefore everybody. I always laugh that I have to take. Whenever I make phone calls, like let's say, because some of my job is marketing, and I got to call somebody up and I got to sell them on a course that I have coming up. So this one sold itself, happiness, right? But some of them are a little harder. You got to commit. If I'm in a good mood, it's always easy to sell a course. Everybody wants to get involved in something that somebody's. It's easy to sell when you have. So all of these things, self mastery. So in other words, if we look at this as an equation, number one is happiness. Number two is that unleashes inner powers, which then allows us to have more self mastery. That's going to lead to success in all areas of life. So that was reason number one of why there are so many benefits to being happy. Okay. But I don't know if that's enough. And I'd like to take this one step deeper. Before I do so, any questions? Not yet. Okay. So let's move on to this same question, but now we're going to tackle it from a deeper perspective. So remember, the question on the table is, we asked it on page 11 in your books. Why does happiness produce so many positive benefits in our lives? So the first answer is the equation you have in front of you on the screen. The second answer is going to get a little bit more spiritual and a little bit more mystical, and it's obviously a little bit deeper than this idea. It's not just us. It turns out it's also related to God. Mark, you want to read for us, please? We're holding text 2. We're on page 13. And this is from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev.
Okay. What page is that?
Page 13.
Okay. Okay. The Baal Shem Tov?
Yes.
Okay, the Baal Shem Tov would constantly declare, it is written, Psalm 121, line 5, God is your shadow. Just as a shadow mimics what a person does, so too, God, so to speak, mimics what a person does.
What is the meaning of this statement? There is a very, very famous verse in Psalms. I say very famous because you're all familiar with this psalm. It's Psalm 121. I raise my eyes to the heavens, from where shall my help come, right? At the end, we've been saying it a lot, by the way, recently for Israel, etc., right? At the end of the psalm, there's this line. It says, Hashem tzilcha, God is your shadow. So normally, the simple translation of that, as we say, God is your shadow means God is like your protective shade. That's very often how they translate it in the Hebrew English books of Psalms. But actually, the Baal Shem Tov is taking this to the next level. Take a look what he says in text 2. God is your shadow means, just like when you move your hand, your shadow moves its hand, right? Whenever we're walking with my children, I want them to hurry up a little bit. I tell them, let's do a race. Okay, so then I'm racing them, whatever. We try to move a little quicker. What's if they're not in the mood of racing me? I tell them, let's race your shadow. Let's see if you can win your shadow. No, we're walking. It's after Shabbos afternoon or something, and the sun is baking. Let's see if you can race your shadow. Let's see if you can get home before your shadow. And obviously, we all understand the futility in that. Why? Because as soon as you move your leg, your shadow moves its leg. So the Baal Shem Tov shares a mystical idea, and it's really rooted in the Zohar, which we're about to read in text 3a. And Mark, I'm going to ask you to read that as well. So hold on one second. That whatever you do down here, God mimics our actions. Let's see text 3a. Mark.
Come and observe. Our world is always ready to receive the spiritual flow that emanates from above. The upper world provides in accordance with the state below. If the state below is joyous, then correspondingly, abundance flows from above. But if the state below is one of sadness, then correspondingly, the flow of blessing is constricted. Therefore, serve God with joy, Psalm 102, because human joy draws a corresponding supernal joy.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
So the first paragraph of this passage states something very simple, very straightforward, maybe hard to observe, but very simple to understand. The concept is very simple. We are constantly receiving energy from above. Believe it or not, maybe sometimes we get to observe it, maybe sometimes we don't get to observe it, but we're constantly receiving energy from above. There's a flow. There's an energy that's coming down from Shemayim, from God, down to us, right? How do you control that flow? It turns out it depends how you're acting, like a shadow. If you're acting in a happy mood, then the flow to you is going to be happy. And right about now, a lot of us are thinking, hold on a second. There's a whole world out there. There's angels, there's people, there's holy people. And you're telling me that I can affect what type of godly energy comes down to me in this world. You think God has nothing better to do than to look at me and say, hey, Zushi is depressed. Let's send down a depressed energy. Zushi is happy. Let's send down a happy energy. You think so? So I want to share a story that I think will really illustrate this point. It's not really a story. It's an analogy. Imagine you came into a school. All right. Now you're a complete stranger. You've never seen a school before in your life. You walk into the school and you observe the whole school. You didn't get to watch the school being built. You didn't get to watch the format being put together. You literally just walk in one day and you observe the whole school the way the school is operated. The school has 500 children. There's multiple divisions. There's principals and there's deans and there's sub-deans and there's all sorts of things, right? Janitors, everybody, etc. Now, if you're uninitiated, there are multiple ways of looking at the school and appreciating what is the purpose of the school. For example, you might look at the school and come to the conclusion, you know what the most important what the most important goal of the school is? To give the teachers jobs. Why? Because you observe this whole process, everything they're doing seems to be done in order to get a paycheck into the teacher's pocket, right? The teachers seem to be in control. They're the ones who, if they tell the students that they're allowed to talk, students are allowed to talk. If they tell the students they're not allowed to talk, students are not allowed to talk. So you come to the conclusion the purpose is for the teachers, right? This is maybe an observation that you can make, but anybody who actually, if a school is doing things right, the people that are in the school, the people that are operating within the school, they must appreciate that everything that they're doing is for the students. If a random observer comes and sees and thinks it's all for the teachers, that's one thing. Or thinks it's all for the dean, or thinks it's all for the board members, or whatever it is, that's one thing. But if the teachers and the dean and the people within the school system are not 100% aware at every single moment of the day that the reason that they're here is in order to educate the children or to educate these students that have been entrusted into their care, then we have a serious problem within the school. Why do I share this? I share this because the same is true of our world. It is true that there are a lot of beings, perhaps, who have more control and even more autonomy or more say in this world than we do. There are angels, there are animals, there's holy people and less holy people, and all sorts of people, and all sorts of things in this world, right? But we have to be aware of what the purpose of creation is. The reason, and the Torah tells us very clearly, and in today's world we have this catchphrase Tikkun Olam, that the whole purpose of the world was to make this world a home for God. To come into we human beings should make this world a home for God. That's why there's angels, and that's why there was a Beit HaMikdash, and that's why there's this spiritual level and that spiritual realm, and all of it is for that purpose. So it should come as no surprise to us that if we, who are the focal point here, and we're the agents that are supposed to be fulfilling that mission, if we decide to bring a certain energy down, it should come as no surprise that the godly energy comes down the way that we attract it. Now, so if a person is happy, he brings down more abundance from above. What's the connection between these two concepts? So Rabbi Shlomo Majeski, text 3b, is going to elaborate for us. Dave, you have the text open in front of you? We can't hear you. Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, on a small device remotely.
Oh,
so
that's fine. That's fine. Elise, she was here earlier. I'm not sure if she's still here, and I'm not sure if she has the text open.
Here, let me get back to the text. I couldn't get it to print, but I have it here.
On the screen.
And
that's okay.
which
So
section are we on?
Page 15, text 3b.
Okay. When a person is happy, he stands above all his personal limitations and weaknesses. He can do things that he ordinarily could not do. He can forgive his worst enemy. His joy generates inner energy that breaks through and shatters any barrier that stands in his way. When a person creates joy in the spiritual realm, the same thing happens. In the spiritual realm, there are also limitations and barriers, for God has chosen to establish a natural order through which he controls our world. Just as there are rules of nature that govern the physical world around us, there are principles of causality that govern the effects produced by our conduct. On the most general level, these rules follow the following principle. When a person does good, he receives benefits that enable him to continue in this path. If he fails to do good, he will suffer difficulties that make it obvious to him that he should change his ways. These are patterns of causation that God chose to establish in the spiritual realm. Nevertheless, when a person is besimcha, joyous, he creates joy in the spiritual realm. God himself is, so to speak, also besimcha. This causes God to reveal a transcendent dimension that is not bound by the laws of causation mentioned above. In simple terms, this means that God will give great blessings and make positive things happen, even though normally these blessings would not be granted. By radiating simcha, we can awaken simcha above and effect a radical change in the situation before us.
Thank you. So now we have come to the crux of our idea. What is the crux of our idea? When we are happy, we create joy in the divine realm. Now remember, what happens to us when we're happy? What happens to us when we're happy is that we start to effuse more, right? We reveal ourselves more, right? We're more outgoing. Now, so if that's the case, then if we can make God be joyous, by us being joyous, we make God being joyous. So that causes God to reveal a dimension of blessing that transcends limitations that might have been limiting us earlier. And this is the second and deeper idea as to why a person might be more successful in other areas of life. There might be many benefits to being joyous. So number one was because we become in a joyous state, and therefore we're more successful. Number two is that not only are you more successful, you're actually bringing success from above down onto you. You're bringing more, call it luck if you want, call it mazel, call it karma, call it whatever you want, right? You're bringing down more energy from above for you to be successful. And this is why, by the way, you know, one of the most famous inspirational quotes you'll hear on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur is when people say, Shari demot lo ninalu, which means that the doors, the gates of tears are never closed. If you're sincere in your prayers and you actually shed a tear because you're so sincerely repenting, then the doors of repentance will never be closed. Then you walk into a Chabad shul, and they tell you on Simchat Torah, right, that in the 48 hours of Shmini Atzeret to Simchat Torah, which means the 2 days that are at the end of the whole month, they're not as intense as Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, they're certainly not as popular to come to shul, that during that time you can affect more blessings for yourself for the whole year through joy and dancing than through crying. This idea now makes a lot of sense. One source to this is text 4. This is from the Sasaver Rebbe. Ron, can you read for us, please? We're on page 16, text 4.
Joy is loftier than tears. The heavenly gates remain open for our tears. As the Talmud says, the gates of tears are not locked. Joy, however, demolishes and pulverizes the supernal walls and barriers.
So the imagery we're being given here is that if tears can keep doors open, joy can actually demolish the whole gate, the whole barrier that's holding back whatever energy it is that you need in your life. Okay. So I guess what we're trying to say here is that while we might be desiring happiness for happiness itself, because it feels good, because of whatever it is, it's important to understand that it's also accompanied by many, many other benefits. And to conclude our introduction for today's for this course, I'd like to share one more idea. All right, and that is the difference between the word happiness and the Hebrew word for happiness, which is simcha. Before we do so, let's do another exercise. All right. So I know a lot of you don't have the textbook in front of you, so you can follow along with me if you'd like on the screen. This is an exercise we are not going to ask anybody to share, but as I know many of you know, especially because you're attending this course already, so we know, it's going to be very beneficial to you yourself to be able to do this exercise. All right. So if you're watching this video or if you're here live with us, just choose a number. In general, I consider myself, right, on a scale of 1 to 7, less happy or more happy, where 1 is the least happy and 7 is the most happy. Choose a number. I'll soon tell you how to score yourself. Number 2, compared with most of my peers, I consider myself on a scale of 1 to 7, not a very happy person or a very happy person. Question number 3. Some people are generally very happy. They enjoy life regardless of what is going on, getting the most out of everything. To what extent does that characterization describe you? On a scale of 1 to 7, where 1 is not at all and 7 is a great deal. And the last question is, some people are generally not very happy. Although they are not depressed, they never seem as happy as they might be. To what extent does this characterization describe you? Again, scale of 1 to 7, not at all or a great deal. All right, how do you score yourself? So by the way, this is a test that thousands of people have taken. And this question, with specifically this question here, and scientists have compared their scores. Here's how you get your score. Whatever your answers were to those 4 questions, add the 4 of them up together, and then divide that number by 4. All right, that should give you a score. And older adults, which seems to me to be about 30 years and older, right? That's what we're calling older adults here. They usually average a score of 5.6. College age people are usually a bit below that. They're at 5. And I think this is a good exercise to do because it helps us appreciate where we are. It makes us think about things that we don't necessarily think about all the time. All right, okay. Having thought about those happiness levels, let's talk about the question of how to become a happier person. In order to do that, we have to talk about the difference between the word simcha and the word happiness. All right? Does anybody know where the word happiness comes from? Can anybody think of any English words that are similar to the word happiness? Anybody?
Happy.
Happenstance? Anybody?
Instance.
Happenstance has that word in there, same word that there is in happiness. The word haphazard has within it as well the same word, hap. And we also use that term whenever we want to talk about unlucky, about someone who's unlucky, we say he's a hapless individual, right? All of them have this 3-letter word, which by the way is a very useful word in Boggle, because the H, I use this word all the time in Boggle, because the H and the P are very high scoring words. You put it on a triple word score, you're good to go. The word hap means luck, all right? So the word happiness was developed at a time when the understanding of how a person is happy is just by the circumstances that happen to them. See it? The circumstances that happen to them cause a person to be happy. However, understanding happiness from that perspective has what I would call it's a very limited perspective. Why is it a very limited perspective? Because it turns out that happiness is not only determined, and not just not only, but maybe not even at all determined by the circumstances that happen to us. Remember that question at the opening of our lesson? Let's read text 5, shall we? Mark, if I can ask you to read for us, please. We're on page 18, text 5. This is a very interesting study that was done.
Okay, let me find it. Okay, got it. One of the first empirical studies to provide a glimpse into the problems of affluent youth was a comparative investigation of low-income urban 10th graders and their upper socioeconomic status, suburban counterparts. The sample included 264 suburban students who were mostly from Caucasian white-collar families and 224 inner-city youth who were predominantly minority and of low SES. Affluent youth reported significantly higher levels of anxiety across several domains and greater depression. They also reported significantly higher substance use than inner city students, consistently indicating more frequent use of cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, and other illicit drugs.
Now, common sense would dictate that the more affluent teens should be sheltered from risk, right? Because they have increased opportunities, they go to better schools, they have better mentors in their lives, right? They have more money, luxuries, vacations, etc., to provide them happiness. They don't need to go and follow these bad practices. But in reality, their low-income counterparts were actually using them less. Why is that? That's because happiness is not necessarily related to happiness. It's not necessarily only related to what happens to you, such as the circumstances that make up your life. Now, this is fairly straightforward. And I think that most of us here probably were aware of this before we came to today's class. But what I'm really leading to is to the next point. What is the Hebrew word for happiness? The Hebrew word for happiness is simcha. All right? And you will notice that simcha, or bisimcha, which means with joy, is the same letters as another Hebrew word. Okay? So you have a bet, you have a sin, you have a mem, you have a chet, a shin, and a hey. What you do is you take those letters and you just scramble them, and you end up with the Hebrew word machshava, which means thought. And this is what leads us to the title of today's course, and this will conclude our introduction to today's course, and that is, how does happiness think? In other words, Judaism has a different answer to the question of what leads to happiness, different than your circumstances, different than the hap or the things that happen to you, and that is, what are you thinking about? What is going on in your brain? You see, Judaism has another rule, which is moach shalit al lev, which means that a mind rules over the heart. Your intellect rules over your emotions by nature, by its very nature. So we can tap into a natural process of going from mind to heart to use that to become more happy, to be more happy. And it's not going to involve anything outside of it. We could not have any clothing, any house, any relationships, anything. There's something within us internally that we can do, which connects mind and heart, that our machshava, the way we think, can lead to us being happy. And that is the theory that underlies everything we are going to study over the next six lessons of this course. How happiness thinks. And with this, we conclude the intro. We are going to move on to the first thought, the first way of changing our thinking in order to be happier. Okay? So we have now about 45 minutes left of the class, and that's what we are going to try and tackle. Listen, there are many attitudes, I think, that are vital to happiness. There's a lot of things, and we're going to talk about them over the next 6 weeks. But the one I'd like to talk about today is a very central issue, and it's the way we look at ourselves. In other words, our own self-concept. All right? In English, we call this self-esteem. So learning exercise number 3 is on page 20. It's very, very important, because this is literally the topic for the next 40 minutes. I want you to take a pen, and for those of you that don't have the book in front of you, let me just kind of show it to you with my hands, because there's no slide for this one. Which attitude do you think, we're on the scale of this attitude, this particular attitude of self-esteem, we're on that scale, do you think a person who is happy is going to be? All right? All the way on one side of the spectrum, we have, I deserve a lot of admiration. And all the way on the other side of the spectrum, we have, I don't deserve any admiration. So this is kind of a self-esteem or arrogance, or whichever word you want to use, right? Self-confidence spectrum, going all the way from I don't deserve any admiration, all the way to I deserve a lot of admiration. Where along that spectrum would you put your marker for where a happy person should be? Dave, what do you think? Where should that be? Should it be all the way to the side of zero self-confidence or zero arrogance? Or should it be all the way to the side of or somewhere in the middle, or skewing to one direction? What do you think?
Well, I think it's towards the opposite, that I deserve it, but I deserve it because I've earned it. So I would say maybe not to the total end, but going in that direction. Like happiness is something I deserve. I need to work for and earn it, but I deserve to be happy.
So past the 50% mark,
yes,
to I deserve a lot of admiration.
75 to 80 on that side. Not 75. I don't know if admiration, that's almost like ego and deceit, but I think
so hold on. That's exactly what we're talking about here. I can use words for both sides that are either positive or negative. The word self-confidence and the word ego are kind of, they're two sides of the same coin. And that's on one end of the spectrum. And on the other end of the spectrum is a lack of self-esteem or humility, whichever word you want to use for it. The question here is, where do you want to be in order to be happy? This particular attitude. What should our self-concept be? Should I be full of myself in a good way or a bad way, whatever, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or maybe you believe it should be a 50-50. That's the question on the table.
I think more 50-50 with that, because
you're saying now that I elaborated, you feel like it's more 50-50, not to the 75-80.
Yeah, because if you expect, well, I deserve it no matter what, then you set yourself up for failure or disappointment when you don't get it. and then maybe you feel like you don't have to earn it. It's an ongoing issue. Happiness has to be an ongoing thing.
Yes. Okay. I see it. I see where you are. Okay. I want to take a moment just to read a few texts that are going to really bring us to where you are. Okay. And that is like this. We're going to talk about both sides of the coin. I think it's obvious to most of us, and I think Dave right away went in that direction, that you cannot be all the way on the extreme side of I don't deserve any admiration, zero self-confidence. If a person thinks low of himself, he's never going to be happy. He might have many blessings in his life. He might have many opportunities in his life, but he's not comfortable in his own skin. And as a result, how is he ever going to be happy? Any external positives, he's basically going to treat them as meaningless because he's never going to be happy about them. Oh, I happened to get lucky this time, but it's not going to happen again. Right? He's always going to view himself negatively. Not just that, but actually having a negative self-confidence leads to other impediments to happiness. There's a rabbi who was also a doctor. His name is Abraham J. Twersky. He has a few very, very insightful books on Jewish thought. He has an amazing one called Positive Parenting. For those of you that are interested in exploring that a little bit more, I gave a whole parenting course, and some of it was based on his work. But today we're going to be quoting from a book of his called Let Us Make Man. All right? And Ron, I'm going to ask you to read for us text 7a and 7b, in which he talks about some of the impediments that a negative self-concept can lead to, which can then lead to you not being able to be happy. In other words, you can get yourself into a headspace where even if good things happen to you and you have good circumstances, you still can't be happy. Maybe this explains some of the people that have money or have a good relationship, but they're still not happy. There's a space we can go to in our brain, a negative self-concept, which then leads us to then become unhappy. Go ahead, Ron. 7a.
A trait often present in people with negative self-images is that they try to please everyone. People who fear that they are unlikable are apt to try to buy friendship, as it were, by ingratiating themselves to others. If asked to do something, they will invariably comply because although they wish to say no, they are afraid that refusing someone's request may cost them that person's affection or friendship. As a result, these people often carry a great deal of resentment within themselves and are angry that others are taking advantage of them. These people pleasers are unquestionably unhappy people.
So issue number one with having a very, very low self-confidence is that you're going to become a people pleaser, and that will obviously become an impediment to being happy. Issue number two, Ron, text 7b, please.
Stresses of everyday life are virtually unavoidable. Huh? What was that?
I'm sorry. That was someone else. I'm not sure. Somebody had some background noise. Go ahead.
Stresses of everyday life are virtually unavoidable, whether they are job or business worries, family problems, or social stresses. People who feel themselves to be competent are generally able to cope with these stresses and make the proper adjustments, often bringing the problems to satisfactory resolutions. People who consider themselves inadequate, however, are apt to see many normal stress situations as being overwhelming, not because the challenges are actually so enormous, but because they feel too inadequate to cope with them.
Thank you. He points out first a very simply understood point, which is life has stresses. Life has normal, regular stresses, right? Think about, for example, when someone you know, a loved one you know, is struggling with something. Maybe their house was flooded with mold or something like that, right? Maybe they had just had a baby. Maybe they have someone in their life that's very, very ill, right? What's one of the first things we do? We offer, as friends and family, we offer to take some of the regular stress. Oh, you don't have to worry about picking up the kids from school. I'm going to take care of it. You don't have to worry about where to live. You can move in with me. It's going to be okay. You don't have to worry about dinner for the next week. I'm going to make a meal train and I'm going to arrange 6 people. Each person's going to cook dinner for you one night. You're going to be okay. Why are we doing that? Because what happens when a person is dealing with a high level stress situation is that the small things that usually they're capable of handling in their lives, which are hard. It's hard to make dinner every single night. It's hard to pay the rent every single month. It's hard to make sure all these things, right? Pick up the kids every day from school. But they're usually manageable to your average person, right? When you're in a situation where there's a high level of new stress, that's why we offer to help out with these things. Now, if a person is constantly walking around as if they don't deserve anything in life, they have a very negative self-concept, they're gonna struggle. They're gonna find it difficult to manage even the most standard day-to-day normal stresses of life. Right? So that is impediment number 2. And the third one, Ron, text 7C, is on page 21, one more, is that we become overly sensitive to criticism.
People who have negative self-images are extraordinarily sensitive. Their egos are so fragile and they so anticipate that their imaginary defects will be noticed, that they may develop a type of paranoia, interpreting even benign remarks as insults and grossly exaggerating any remarks or actions which may be remotely critical of them.
Thank you, Ron. So the third thing is that they're going to have more unhappy experiences in their lives because they're going to interpret things as unhappy. I don't have a good self-image, so therefore, if somebody else says to me, "You idiot," I interpret it immediately as if he's calling me, right? Have you ever been in such a situation? You say something to somebody, not the word idiot, but something much more harmless, and somehow they interpret it as you're insulting them, and you think to yourself, "Where'd you get that from?" That's from your own self doubt. That didn't come from me. I was saying something harmless about you, and then all of a sudden that was blown up. Why? Because they bring about, somebody who has a very negative self-image is bound to bring about on themselves even more offense, even more harm that they'll get from other people, which other people are not even giving out to them. So it turns out that what starts off as just seemingly like one small issue, they have a negative self-image, compounds on itself and brings about lots of other impediments to happiness. Because obviously all of these things, obviously trying to be a people pleaser and constantly being offended by things that other people are telling you, and not being able to deal with the everyday stresses of life, which are the things that were brought up by him in text 7A, 7B, and 7C respectively. Obviously, those are going to be big impediments to happiness. Okay. So we've established that along the spectrum of completely not full of myself to completely full of myself, I don't want to be here. Why? Because if I have zero self-image, if I have zero self-esteem, then I'm going to bring about lots of negativity to my life. Okay, so should I swing to the other direction? Absolutely not. It turns out that being too arrogant is also going to come with its own issues, right? At first, you might assume that a person like that is very happy with themselves, very comfortable in their own skin, but it's not necessarily the case. Not just because somebody is arrogant and so full of themselves, at least externally, does that mean that inside they're actually comfortable in their own skin? Elise, if you can read for us, please, text 8. This is a medrash. It's on page 22, text 8. It's a medrash which describes a conversation between two rivers, the Euphrates River and the Tigris River. Go ahead, Elise. Text 8.
Okay. They said to the Euphrates, "Why is your sound not audible?" "My deeds make me known," it replied. "When a person plants a plant next to me, it matures in 30 days. When a person sows a vegetable next to me, it sprouts in 3 days." They said to the Tigris, "Why is your sound audible?" "If only my voice would be heard so that I may be noticed," it answered.
So just because a person is loud doesn't mean that they're full of themselves. Actually, it could be they're so empty, they have such a low self-image that they're overcompensating for that by trying to make themselves heard, right? You know the story they tell about the boy who takes a girl on a date? He's talking and talking and talking about himself, and he's talking about himself, and he's talking about himself, he's talking about himself, etc. The girl in her head is thinking, forget it. This guy is so obsessed with himself. He's so narcissistic. There's no way I'm ever going to get a word in edgewise. This is the first date, but it's also the last date, and that's it, right? And then she thinks, you know what? Maybe just he's starting off that way. We'll see what happens. Sure enough, at some point he takes a breath. He says, "All right, enough about me." And she thinks, okay, maybe there's hope. He finishes. He says, "Enough about me. Let's hear what you have to say about me." If a person is so obsessed with themselves that they're constantly, not necessarily does that mean that they actually have a good self-concept. Maybe actually they have such a low self that they're afraid here to leave space for anybody else because they need to take up all the space. Because heaven forbid if somebody else takes the space, then that means that I don't exist. They're kind of trying to constantly prove to themselves that they exist. And even if a person is, even if somebody who's arrogant is truly happy, they'll still find it hard to be happy because arrogance leads to other things. Mark, you want to read for us, please? Text 9.
There is more happiness upon receiving a gift than receiving a wage. One does not work for a gift and does not deserve it. So one can be happy upon receiving the gift. But a person works for a wage and deserves it. So there is less reason for joy upon receiving it. A person who is overly self-aware, who mistakenly believes himself to be of high standing, who therefore thinks that he deserves everything he has, this person will have no happiness in all that he has.
Thank you, Mark. You know, I once read a piece of research. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal in a column called Ask Ariely. There's a professor at Duke University, a social scientist or behavioral scientist or something like that. His name is Dan Ariely, and he had a column in the Wall Street Journal years and years and years ago that was called Ask Ariely. Somebody once asked him, what is the perfect level of how much to hype up something when you're referring it to someone else? So we've all had this experience, right? Somebody tells you, I tried a particular bottle of wine, or I watched a particular movie, or I read a certain book, and then they hype it up and they talk about how amazing it is to you, right? And as a result, they ruin it for you. Why? Because then you come to it and you're like, it was okay. You know what I mean? So he once spoke about it. He said, you don't want to hype it up too much, because when you hype it up too much, what happens is, somebody tells you, I watched this movie. It's the best movie I've ever seen in my life. What do you, as the recipient of such a comment, of such a compliment to the movie, what do? You're like, listen, this is the best movie I ever watched, but it's got to be better than that, right? In fact, you start to create this fictional level, which is a level that a movie cannot even be at. And that's where you put this movie. Now, and this is the image you have, this is the expectation you have in the movie when you come in. Then you come and you watch the movie, you're like, hold on a second, it wasn't there at all. I mean, it wasn't a bad movie, but it wasn't like this fantastical movie, when really no movie could ever live up to that expectation. Why? Because when the guy was hyping it up to you, he was creating such a high expectation. As we know, our disappointments and our fulfillments and our happiness is very much related to expectation. So if that's the case, then a person who is arrogant, a person who constantly thinks, I deserve everything, no matter what good happens to him, yeah, of course I got that good. I deserve that good. In fact, I should have gotten more good. Right? To a certain degree, he's never going to be able to be happy because he's so arrogant. In fact, first, it's twofold. And I said them both, but I just want to make sure to differentiate. Number one is the good things that are happening to him, he won't be happy about. Because that's obvious. Like, of course, I expected that to happen. And not only that, he'll have a whole bunch of other expectations that are unmet. Further, because he's so arrogant, he has expectations of other things that should happen that he doesn't get, inevitably. And those unmet expectations will lead to disappointment and to lack of happiness in his life. So where we are here, folks, is that if you think about that spectrum that we had up earlier, it turns out having a negative self-concept to one extreme side is not a good recipe for happiness. Why? Because it's going to lead to you being a people pleaser. It's going to lead to you feeling inadequate. Every stressful situation will become overwhelming. You're going to be very sensitive, etc. These are all a recipe for lack of happiness. But on the flip side, if you're too arrogant, right? So then that might be an expression of low self-esteem. It'll make you unhappy with everything that you have, and it'll often make other experiences which are unattainable, maybe, or certainly undeserved. Those are expectations that you have, and because you don't get them, therefore you're unhappy about it. So being too extreme to either side of this self-image will automatically lead to a lack of happiness. So Judaism provides us with an extremely positive recipe, so to speak, how to view ourselves in order to set ourselves up for happiness. What is that? So I want to start, even though this is going to seem a little bit contradictory to the point that I'm saying right now, to what I'm saying right now, I want to start with text 10. Text 10 is a quote from Ethics of Our Fathers. I'll read it for us. Me'od me'od havishval ruach. Be very, very humble, tells us Ethics of Our Fathers, right? To explain, the Rambam, Maimonides, in his magnum opus, right, in his Mishnah Torah, he has a whole bunch of laws. There's a section on the laws of kosher. There's a section on the laws of Shabbat. There's a section on the laws of the land of Israel and the agricultural laws that apply to the land of Israel. Section on the laws of marriage and divorce. You know, all sorts of sections. One of the most interesting sections is called Hilchot Deot. Hilchot Deot means the laws of character traits. And in it, he basically advises, for the most part across the board, a person should always go, as he calls it, b'derech hamitzua, in the middle path. You shouldn't be too greedy. You shouldn't be too frugal, right? You shouldn't be you shouldn't spend all your money and be too, what's the word I'm looking for? Not greedy. Spend whatever the word is, right? You shouldn't spend all your money, but you also shouldn't save all your money, right? You shouldn't be too, everything he says, this extreme is no good, that extreme is no good, be in the middle. There's two exceptions. One is anger and one is ego. With those two things, he says you should stick away from them to the extreme and you should be very, very humble. He's basing it on this Mishnah. Ethics of our fathers tells us, as we know, every single word of our sages is exact. If they say ma'od, ma'od, be very, very humble, that means you have to be very, very humble. It's not something like, oh, find the middle path. You have to be very, very humble. Now, looking at this from a just a straightforward, you look at this, you think to yourself, hold on a second. So the Mishnah is basically advising on that spectrum to be all the way to the negative self-image position. But it turns out it's not true. It turns out that from a Jewish perspective, being humble doesn't mean having no self-esteem. Let's take a look at text 12. All right, this is definitely very much within the teachings of Chassidus. This is the Rebbe quoting his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe. Elise, can you read for us, please? We're at text 12 on page 26.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. There is a well-known teaching of the Rebbes of Chabad. Just as we need to know the defects, so too we need to know our strengths. The anomaly in this phase is that it says our strengths, but with regard to defects, it merely says the defects, not our defects. What is the reason for this? Leviticus 4.2 states, when a soul sins and discusses the process of rectification, the Zohar, however, phrases this as a possible question, as a question of bewilderment. A soul sinned, is that possible? Meaning the concept of sin is completely alien to our being. Even when we stumble, God forbid, it does not undermine who we are. Rather, it is something outside of our nature that has latched onto us. We are citizens of a material and mundane world, and it is therefore possible for something unholy to attach itself to us. Though it is a defect in a sense, it is not our defect, but a defect imposed by our environment.
So thank you, Elise. So on the one hand, we must know that we are very, very humble. If we're very, very humble, that's a dictum from our sages. It's a challenge from our sages. Be as humble as you can be. Very, very humble, right? All the way to the extreme. Don't take the middle path. On the flip side, we're being told you can't just know your defects. You also need to know your benefits. You have to know who you are. You have to know your strengths and be proud of them and own up to them. And even if you have a defect, that defect is not really your defect. It's a defect that's trying, but you and yourself, you're pure and beautiful. Not only are you beautiful, take a look at text 13a. The Baal Shem Tov says, excessive humility will distance a person from serving God. Whoa, how does that work? Mark, you want to read for us? Text 13b. How does what's wrong with you excessive? I thought we said be very, very humble. What's wrong with excessive humility? The Baal Shem Tov explains. Text 13b.
Okay. Our perceived lowliness, yeah, will lead us to a disbelief that our prayer and Torah study stimulate a flow of divine effluence to all the supernal worlds, and that the angels are nourished by our Torah study and prayer, If we were to truly believe this, how incredibly great would be the joy and reverence that accompany our service. We should be mindful that we are a ladder that is stood upon earth, that stood upon earth, whose head reaches the heavens. Genesis 28:12. And all our gestures, engagements, words, and movements have an effect on high.
Says the Baal Shem Tov, don't underestimate yourself. You have to be aware that when you do a mitzvah, that mitzvah can affect all the heavens. Don't put yourself down. So you have to be very humble, but still be full of yourself. Which leads, by the way, to text 14. The very powerful text. Ron, you want to read it for us, please? This is from Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen.
Just as we must believe in God, so too we must afterward believe in ourselves, that God cares about us, that we are not worthless laborers, that we possess divine souls, and that God takes pleasure and joy when we fulfill his desire.
Thank you, Ron. So how does Judaism, first of all, endorse humility and demand of us to be very, very humble? But at the same time, we have all these texts that don't seem to be compatible, right? Do our inherent, and this is the question being asked on page 28, do our inherent and immutable goodness and our ability to affect cosmic change, is that a contradiction to humility? What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to lie to ourselves and say, and how does that even work? Do you lie to yourself and say, oh, I'm not really anything, and yet on the other hand, know that your mitzvahs can affect change in the entire world? How could you be full of yourself and humble at the same time? How could you have self-esteem, but no self-esteem, no self-image at the same time? So Chassidus defines humility slightly different than the way we've been talking about it till now. Till now, we've been using two words kind of interchangeably, humility and lowliness. And the previous Rebbe, text 15, is about to make a huge difference between those two. Ron, you want to keep reading? Text 15, page 29.
Humility is not synonymous with inferiority. It is not due to a lack of inner good or to being on a bad path. Heaven forbid. We should contemplate how all the good we possess is an inheritance from our ancestors. We should not take credit for our belief in God or for our willingness to give up our lives for our faith, because these are natural inborn traits we inherited from our ancestor Abraham. This is the idea of humility. We do not take credit for the good we possess, knowing that our attainments are not our own doing, but something we received by inheritance. This is the meaning of the verse, Moses was exceedingly humble, more than any person on the face of the earth. Moses was cognizant of his own qualities and was aware that his lofty spiritual level was unparalleled, but he was still humble. He recognized that all of these qualities were given to him from above. He felt that if another person would be endowed with the same abilities and qualities as he, the other would have equaled his achievements, or perhaps even surpassed them. It was this that led Moses to be the humblest man of all.
Thank you, Ron. So it turns out that ma'oid have a shval ruach, that we should be very, very humble, is not it's not promoting a negative self-concept. What is it saying? It's saying humility should be defined in the proper way, and then you can have humility all the way to the end. Humility is, first of all, not synonymous with being lowly. You're not low. You're not inferior. That's not what being humble means. Okay? So that's why you don't need to lie, right? You don't need to say, oh, I've accomplished X, Y, and Z. You don't need to look at people or to yourself and say, I didn't really accomplish them. Right? Let's take somebody like I don't know, somebody who has a successful business, who wants to be humble. Does that mean that he needs to say to somebody else, oh, I didn't really build the business built itself? He's literally lie. Or he has to say, oh, my vice president built the business, when it's not really true. He built the business from the ground up. That's what he's supposed to do. Lie? No, that's not what true humility means. So then, well, how does true humility work? True humility means that we look at our mailot, at our strengths, at our accomplishments, and we recognize the truth, which is that they're not due to anything outside of us. They're not due to my own personal self, but rather they're due to something outside of me. Whether it's a talent that Hashem gave me, whether it's a circumstance, a position that I was in, an opportunity that was handed to me by a circumstance that Hashem put together, whether it's someone else assisting me or doing something for me, etc., etc. And I think this is a very, very powerful perspective. In other words, to be truly humble is capable even of is something that even the most accomplished person in this world is capable of. And that's why the blueprint for this, the model for this that's given to us is Moses himself. Moses literally took the Jewish people out of Egypt. He split the sea for them. He brought manna from heaven for them and water from rocks and all the wonderful, amazing things that he did, shepherding them through the desert, guiding them and serving Hashem, brought them the Torah on Mount Sinai, etc., etc., etc. And still, in one of the final verses in the Torah tells us, "V'ha'ish Moshe anav mikol ha'adam apnei ha'adama." This man, Moses, was the most humble person that ever walked the earth. How does that work? Was he lying to himself? The answer is no. He was not lying to himself. He had a different perspective on all of those things that we attribute to him. He had a different perspective. Oh, I took the Jewish people out of Egypt? I didn't take them out. God took them out. It happens to be that it was me. Yeah, but if God would have chosen somebody else, they would have done a better job than me. Right? Oh, I managed to do this and that. Everything, there was always an excuse why it wasn't him. It was actually because of something else. And the truth is that that's the truth. At the bottom of page 30, you have a learning exercise 4. I want you to have some self-control and not look at the bottom paragraph. Okay, let's do the first part of the exercise, then we'll do the second part of the exercise. The first part of the exercise is I want you to list 3 things, and if you're watching this or if you don't have your book yet, whatever it is, I want you just to think of 3 accomplishments that you can think of in your life. Any personal accomplishments that you have, whether they're personal characteristic accomplishments, like maybe you used to be an addict and you no longer are addicted to a particular substance, you grew in a particular area, right? Or whether they're business accomplishments. I built a certain business, I put something together, I made this happen, whatever it is. Think of 3 accomplishments, personal things that you did in your life. Think of 3 accomplishments. Once you have those 3, now I want you to read the bottom paragraph. And that is, in the right column, after you think of those 3 and you put them in the left column, in the right column, this is on page 30, write down entities that are outside of you that actually provided you with the ability to accomplish that particular accomplishment. Maybe it was a partner or an investor or something that helped with that business or a mentor. Maybe it was God. God gave you certain talents. Maybe it was a circumstance. You happened to get lucky and this happened. God smiled down from you and that's why it happened, etc., etc. It turns out that with regards to almost every single accomplishment that we accomplish in this world, we can blame it, so to speak. And I use the word blame in so to speak, like in air quotes, because it's not really blaming it. The truth is that if we're in tune with ourselves, we're aware that that's not something to show off about. Nothing that we've ever accomplished is something to show off about. We can be confident in ourselves. We can be aware of the fact that we did those things, but they don't spark ego. With the proper perspective, with the proper machshava, the proper way to think about them, all of a sudden you're not full of ego. So, from a Jewish perspective, the proper balance is having humility without having self-inflated arrogance, right? Okay. So humility does not look like somebody that everybody tramples on all over. It doesn't mean somebody who's inferior. It doesn't mean somebody who's in denial of things that he did. It just means somebody who's so confident in himself that he doesn't need to go and tell the whole world about himself. He can be confident in himself, but humble because he recognizes that it comes from God and that it comes from outside. Why have we've been tackling this idea of ego and proper humility today? The reason for that is because this self-concept will lead to joy. Why? Because now we have the building blocks of a proper self-concept that will actually make us happy. Step one is we can understand that we are worth an infinite amount. If we know our intrinsic worth, I am a neshama, a piece of God in this world, I am a sparkling diamond, and all of the things that were mentioned earlier, right? About how amazing the soul is and how amazing our identity is. We can also know our capabilities. I'm a very capable person, etc. But at the same time, these two things, knowing that I'm intrinsically worth it and knowing that I have capabilities, doesn't lead to me needing to put myself out in other people's faces. The opposite. I can be humble, and then I can then see the good things in life, every single good thing in life, as a gift. I'm so grateful that Hashem chose to give this gift to me. And why does this lead to happiness? Because remember when we that's why there's a verse in Isaiah where Yeshaya says, Yeshaya Hanavi, he says, that the humble shall increase their joy in God. Why? Because when you're humble, when you realize that you're worth something, but you don't ever believe that ever makes you therefore be owed any of the things that are being, any of the blessings that are being given to you, then every blessing that comes to you is a gift and you're grateful for it. So you have this intrinsic self-worth, but yet a humility that balances it. And that's this balance that really leads to happiness. The healthy balance, the healthy image, the healthy self-image that really leads to happiness. On the one hand, you have admiration for who you are and what you can do, but that admiration does not lead to you taking personal credit. And as a result, anything that Hashem sends your way is the biggest gift, and you're super thankful for it, and you're very happy for it. This is one way of looking at the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which basically summarizes this in one line. Ezehu Ashir, who is someone who is rich? Hasameach bechelko, someone who is happy with what he has. What does it mean he's happy with what he has? It means that whatever he gets, he's happy with. Why? Because he appreciates that anything he's being given is a gift from Hashem. Hashem, it's never owed to him, and Hashem is giving it to him only out of the goodness of his heart, and therefore he's very thankful. Okay. This concludes the point I want to make about a healthy self-image leading to happiness. But now I want to take this idea one step deeper, and with this we'll conclude. What could be even deeper than this? What's even deeper than this is to appreciate that, therefore, the deeper the bittul, the deeper the humility, automatically the deeper will be the happiness. So, right now, some of you are thinking, you know what? Listen, I'm not the most arrogant person in the world, right? And you know what? As a result, I'm not the most depressed person in the world. It's true. I am aware of who I am. I don't think I'm like nothing. I don't think I'm like dust of the earth. I try not to be arrogant. I try to follow what's been discussed so far in today's lesson. And as a result, I'm pretty happy. And you know what? You're right. The more I do of that, the more I can be happy. But here's the point we want to add at the end of today's lesson. And this is the thought I want to leave you with. But I think this is an actionable moment. And that is, if we can take our humility, this idea that we were talking about, and make it deeper, then we will actually be happier. You see, it turns out that even at its most extreme, humility, and again, we mean here healthy humility, as was defined until now, the humility as it was defined until now. This true humility, there's no too extreme with it. You can go all the way to the end, and it's still healthy. What does true humility look like? What does the ultimate humility all the way to the extreme look like? It looks like text 16a and 16b. Mark, can you read for us 16a, please? We're on page 31. I think we lost Mark. Okay. Elise, can you read for us, please?
Yes. When
page
someone
31.
Okay. When someone senses his head or one of his limbs, it indicates illness. A healthy person does not feel his limbs. The same applies in the spiritual sense. When a person senses his own existence, and this is the definition of arrogance, this indicates a spiritual illness. A spiritually healthy person does not sense himself.
Before we get to 16b, and at least you're going to continue reading for us, but before we get to it, this is such a powerful point. Just like we all know what is the rule with regards to our physical health and physical well-being, you shouldn't feel any part of your body, right? If you feel something, that's a bad sign. If you feel pain, if you all of a sudden become aware of your left pinky toe, we got a problem and you got to go see a podiatrist. If you all of a sudden start to feel one particular elbow because you landed on it the wrong way, time to go see an orthopedist, right? Feeling something is a bad sign. A healthy body, you don't feel it. Everything is just working. You can breathe, right? All of a sudden you get the flu. You're like, why am I feeling every single breath? And I go in and out. I can feel it. On a regular day, you don't even feel it, right? Eyesight. We all know that if all of a sudden you're aware of how much you could see and how much you can't see, that's a problem. You shouldn't be aware of it. You should be able to just see and not even think about it. Granted, this leads sometimes to us taking it for granted, but that's a separate issue we have to deal with. But on a day-to-day basis, he says the same thing is true about ourselves spiritually. If you are feeling yourself, it's a wonderful story. I'll share it in a second. If you're feeling yourself, that's an unhealthy thing. That's an unhealthy thing, right? My brother-in-law, Rabbi Eli Rifkin from Chabad of Northridge, he once shared with me that he took care of his grandfather, Rabbi Gordon, by Yochanan Gordon. By Shalom Gordon. He took care of him in his elderly age, like he was there when he passed. Like he was there the last few weeks before he passed. He was a single yeshiva student, and he used to take care of him. He used to be there every day and help him put on tefillin and help take care of him in the hospital. Anyways, it was a very, very big chassid, Rabbi Shalom Gordon. Anyways, by Shalom Ber Gordon. So my brother-in-law walks in one day, young yeshiva student, he walks in, and in Yiddish he asks him, "Wie fühlst du sich? How are you feeling yourself? And how are you feeling?" Right now, I guess there had been some down days. If you want to know, what are you feeling like? He says he'll never forget that. As my father looked at him and said, "Yeah, that's the problem. I feel myself too much."
Oh, wow.
That's what we're working on here. He wasn't talking about physically. He was talking about this Hasidic idea that feeling yourself too much is a bad place to be. Elise, you want to finish this off for us? Text 16b. Same idea, from a different source.
Humility means that a person does not sense his own existence. Despite all of his good, he does not think of himself as an object of significance. He does not claim credit or think that he has special standing. The humble person is completely unabsorbed in himself.
These texts, 16a and 16b, they're offering a very, very radical idea. I'm not sure if everybody's following. But for the completely humble, much of our conversation, even until now, has been missing the point. Why? Because are we trying to figure out how we should view ourselves like this, or view ourselves like that? You shouldn't be viewing yourself at all. The healthiest way, the healthiest self-image to have is to be so engrossed in living life, so present in the mission that you have in this world, in doing a mitzvah, and to learning Torah and whatever it is, that you don't even feel yourself. If this seems very radical to you, it's because it is, but it's also because most of us don't usually experience this every single moment of our lives. We have moments when we do. We're going to skip text 17, but text 17, which is from an author that I can't pronounce, I won't try. It's from a book that's called Flow, right? What does he describe in the book? The author describes entering a state of being where mentally you're so immersed in the task. And he talks about it from if you're climbing a mountain, or if you're whatever, reading or dancing or listening to music. Sometimes you can enter the space where you so don't feel yourself because you're in the action, you're in the moment, right? But the truth is, the best way to get there is actually to get out of the moment. The ultimate humility is, I'm so engrossed in the mission, in Hashem wants me now to be doing X, Y, or Z. I'm teaching a class in Torah. Right now, I'm doing this. To get out of yourself, stop thinking about yourself. This morning, I went walking with a fellow that I go walking with every Monday morning. We're learning Hebrew, conversational Hebrew. And he likes to walk together. We walk together and we try to, as much as possible, to up the percentage of how much Hebrew there is in the conversation instead of English. So I told him, I'm teaching this class tonight, happiness, this, whatever. So he goes, tell it to me in a nutshell. I said, if I had to give it to you in a nutshell, it's the less you think about being happy, the more happy you will be. He liked that idea, and he related to that idea. He found it very relatable. The more you're engrossed in this conversation, the less happy you're going to be because you're thinking about yourself. And as we said, in order to be happy, we have to be able to get out of ourselves, to transcend ourselves, to be involved in the mission that Hashem has for us in this world. I have a personal challenge in my life. It's not such a challenge, but it's a situation that I find myself in very often. Sometimes I'm in a bad mood, right? But I have a class that I need to teach because I teach a lot of classes, right? I have to teach a class on the parsha, or a class on happiness, or a class on medical ethics, whatever it is, right? Inevitably, it's so shocking to me. I come to the class, I'm so not in the mood of it. I'll tell my wife, I'm so not in the mood of teaching the class tonight, whatever it is, right? And inevitably, in the 60 or 90 minutes that it takes to teach, by the time I'm back, my wife sometimes has like a disconnect, there's like a dissonance between the beginning, before the class, only 60 to 90 minutes passed, but by the time the class is over, she's like, oh, you feeling better? And I'm like, wow, oh, I forgot I was feeling I was in a bad mood. Why? Because what happens when you're teaching a class is one of the most extreme examples of this. During those 60, 90 minutes, you're not even, I don't have time to think about, oh yeah, I missed my appointment, or something happened, or something fell through, and I'm upset about that. You're in a different moment. You enter what this particular author would call a state of flow, or what Hasidus would call not feeling yourself. You would all of a sudden, it's not, you don't feel arrogant, you feel, no. It turns out that whether you're feeling arrogant or whether you're feeling humble, you're feeling yourself. They're both coming from the Yetzer Hara. You're too busy thinking about yourself. The path to true happiness is like this. Understanding that step one, Hashem created man as a purposeful being. And if we can get into that purpose, throw myself into that purpose, so much so that I don't even feel myself, then automatically I'm going to be happy. Why? Because I'm not so busy thinking about it. I did deserve it. I didn't deserve it. I'm arrogant. I'm humble. You're not busy with it. You've thrown yourself into the moment. It's the ultimate humility, because you've completely transcended yourself, even if just for a few moments. And the more we can do that in life, the more happy moments we will experience. That's why I give the example of teaching a class, but a much more basic example is helping someone else. It should come as no surprise to anybody that scientists recently have discovered that one of the things that makes a person the most happy is helping someone else. Ron, you want to bring this home for us? Or sorry, Mark, you want to bring this home for us? Text 18. We're on page 33. Mark, you with us? You're muted, Mark. I was wondering why we couldn't hear you. You looked like you were reading.
Yeah. Okay, I'm on.
Text 18, page 33. We hear you now. Go ahead.
There are multiple ways that kindness can make us happier. Surveys of volunteers, for example, show that volunteering is associated with diminished depressive symptoms and enhanced feelings of happiness, self-worth, mastery, and personal control. A helper high. Consider an unusual study that followed 5 women volunteers over a 3-year period. These 5 women, all of whom had multiple sclerosis, were chosen to act as peer supporters for 67 other MS patients. They were trained in active and compassionate listening techniques and instructed to call each patient for 15 minutes once a month. The results show that over the 3 years, the peer supporters experienced increased satisfaction, self-efficacy, and feelings of mastery. They reported engaging in more social activities and enduring less depression. Oh.
Thank you, Mark. I think this is such a powerful idea. Think about it. The next time you're unhappy, instead of getting more and more and more involved in the unhappiness, even if the unhappiness is because of something, you're experiencing something that's causing you unhappiness, take a moment to go help somebody else. Pick up the phone, call a friend and say, hey, I haven't spoken to you in a long time. I just want to check and see how you're doing. And instead of talking about yourself, talk about them and listen to them and get out of yourself and go into them. Or maybe go and actually do a favor for someone. An opportunity presents itself, go do a favor, give some tzedakah, whatever it is. Get out of yourself. You know what happens? What happens is you're entering a state of flow or a state of complete humility, where it's not just, oh, I am feeling myself, but I recognize that somebody else. No, you're not even feeling yourself in those moments, and that will automatically make you happier. To quote Ellen Langer, who's a professor of psychology at Harvard University, she says, many people worry whether there is life after death. She says, just think about it. If we gave up self-evaluation, we could have more life before death. We're so busy evaluating ourselves that we're taking away moments from our life. Busy self-evaluating. Now, obviously, to an extreme, that's no good. We have to take a moment in certain times, etc. But to get carried away with self-evaluating ourselves, that's what depression looks like. That's what unhappiness looks like. If we want to be happy, we would do well to get out of ourselves. With this, we'll conclude today's lesson. Please turn your attention to video screens for a summary of today's lesson.
Key points. Lesson 1. 1. It is easier to overcome life's challenges from a state of enthusiasm and happiness than from a state of sadness. 2. While we are blessed with many talents and strengths, their full power often remains dormant. Joy unleashes our potential and drives our strengths to flow outward. 3. When we are happy, we create joy in the divine realm. This supernal ecstasy results in the flow of increased blessings. 4. The letters forming the Hebrew word besimcha, with joy, are the same letters that spell machshava, thought. Happiness is a product of our thought processes and attitudes, not our circumstances. 5. The way we perceive ourselves is crucial to happiness. Both a negative self-image and an inflated sense of self-worth are impediments to happiness. 6. Proper humility provides a self-concept that is very conducive to happiness. 7. Humility means engendering a positive self-concept by acknowledging our intrinsic worth and our competence, while still avoiding a sense of entitlement. We recognize that our accomplishments are due to things gifted to us. 8. A greater level of humility is when our concept of self slips below the threshold of awareness and we are completely focused on fulfilling life's calling. Because we are purposeful beings, we find happiness when we are focused on our purpose.
I'd like to conclude today's lesson, as we will every single week, with an exercise for the week. All right? What is the exercise? Each week we are going to end off with an exercise that will help you internalize some of the ideas that we studied that week. This week, this is the exercise, okay? At 5 points throughout the week, especially if you're in a bad place, if you're in an unhappy place, I want you to perform an act of kindness at least 5 times this week, even if you're not. The acts don't need to be for the same person, and the acts don't need to be for the person doesn't need to be aware that you're doing those acts. But you will notice that when you get out and you're finished doing that act, whether it's a long act of kindness like taking someone to the airport, or whether it's calling someone on the phone, or whether it's actually giving tzedakah, you'll know it's as short as giving tzedakah, it doesn't make a difference. By the time it's over, you will notice you are happier. Why? Because what's happened is you've managed to get out of yourself, and the more humility you can get in, the more humble you can get in terms of this level of true humility, the happier you will be. This concludes today's lesson. We look forward to next week's lesson, when we will be doing lesson 2, the joy of purpose, facing stress with patience, mindfulness, and hope. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye, Rabbi.
You got
Thank
it.
you.